All right, and we're live.
Hey, John.
Hey, so this is fun. This is exciting. We're going to be talking about building ASP.NET Core apps in F#. So I'm ready to have my mind blown a bit. This will be good. So how long have you been building? How long has that even been a thing? Building ASP.NET Core apps with F#?
Yeah, it's I think it's always been a thing. It's just been harder to do in the early days because it was like not considered a sort of use case for F#. So there was a lot of sort of, you had to do manual things, or there weren't any docs and no templates and things. So you really had to sort of be dedicated and really want to do F# first, and like, yeah, I'll shoehorn it into ASP.NET. Whereas now it's like, we've got like templates out of the box to do stuff, and there's like an ecosystem around it. So I've been probably doing it for 5 or 6 years now, but it's like every release of .NET, it gets easier and easier. So it's great.
Good stuff. All right. Well, as we always do, we're going to start the show with a quick look at some community links. So I will go in and share my screen here, and just a few this week. Let me see. I'll also bring up the banner so people can see it. Okay. All right. So as always, there's the links. They're in the chat. They'll be in the description. First one from Khalid Abu Hakma. This is a neat one, Branchy. And he's kind of playing with this with the minimal APIs and ASP.NET Core. And the idea here, best shown with some code, is actually like just defining routes kind of hierarchically. And so kind of mapping them in a tree structure. So this is interesting. He's just kind of starting to play with it. Already a few, small gotchas and stuff, but very, very interesting idea. So this is pretty cool. Alpaca. So I saw this from Eric Sink. This is building ASP.NET Core apps with Swift. And so he's actually using native Swift. He's using LLVM, doing some cross-compiling stuff. He's actually got this running with the benchmarks, so the Tech Empower framework benchmarks. And I don't write Swift. I don't really know what I'm looking at here, but this is interesting. So this is writing the benchmark code using Swift. So some neat stuff. A couple of Blazor links. So first from Dave here, he's writing about using the error boundaries in Blazor. So this was one of the things Dan Roth showed these off briefly during the latest show when he was on for a release. This is a great walkthrough where Dave kind of goes through and explains the use case. And the idea is Blazor, if it hits an unhandled exception, you're just going to get this yellow bar at the bottom. And so you can write an error boundary. So here he's got an example using two components together, and one of them is trying to call null dot to lower, and that's not going to work, and you get that error message. So the simple case is that you have an error boundary, and you put your body in there. And when you do that, you're going to get a default error message. And then you can do a little more advanced where you can put in custom error message and make it look a little better. What I like here is that Dave goes a little deeper, and so he shows some things about how you can handle things like recovery and retries. And so here he talks about, like, here you can, it's a very kind of naive, just try it again. But you can also do specific retries. And here it gives a neat case where he's going through and he's got a list of items that he's showing. And for each one, he's got that error content. So you can show some kind of specific things. One question that came up when Dan Roth was showing this off was that, people were asking how you do kind of global exception handling kind of stuff. Hey, welcome to C# Fritz Coding Squad. Thanks for the raid. Always exciting. We are going to be talking about ASP.NET Core with F#. So I'm going through the community links, and then we'll get into that. Congrats to the Blazorize team on the 094 release. So Blazorize is a component library that kind of wraps a lot of CSS frameworks like Bootstrap, Bulma, and Design Material. Makes it easy to do a lot of stuff in kind of a native Blazor format. So a lot of stuff in the release and showing some highlights. There's some really kind of pretty stuff here. There's carousel animations and neat utilities and stuff. So congrats to that team. All right, CSS isolation in Razor Pages. So this is something that we first saw with Blazor. This is available in Razor Pages and MVC as well. And the idea here is you just create index.cshtml.css. And then here's the important trick that I got wrong the first time I tried to use it. You have to also add in this reference. So you have to add in a style sheet reference. So here it's just name of and your project name .styles.css. Once you do that, then it lights up and it creates these kind of generated class names. So those are really cool for writing specific CSS that only is going to apply in one place. So there you go. So Laomi writing about the system.text.json source generator. And this is pretty neat. I love source generators. It's a great way at compile time to generate some source code. And so this is an option. This can generate some serialization logic for you. And in a lot of cases can both, it can be faster in a lot of ways. It doesn't have to do any reflection. It doesn't have to go and inspect and figure out what it's serializing. And it can also do a lot of things like allocate a lot less allocation and stuff. So this is a long, in-depth post walking through all the different kind of options, tons of benchmarks, which are fun, looking at and JSON serialization. There's a lot of just different settings you can use and things. And so walking through ways to do that. So you still have support for the existing serialization logic, but this is also a nice thing that you can enable. And kind of a neat thing building on that, Tomas is writing about using IEnumerable async for async streamed JSON. So he has done some previous posts about ND JSON. That's new line delimited JSON. So each line is delimited by a new line, and each is a valid JSON value. And as a result, you're able to stream that. And so that is just kind of an industry sort of standard thing. So he's written about those in the past. He writes about using iasync enumerable and how, you can get it. Iasync enumerable is okay, but it's not actually streaming. It's just buffering and reducing the allocation. So he shows an example here where he goes through and writes everything out, and you'll see in the top one, everything is just delivered all at once. So all of these come through at the same millisecond. And then he shows using ND JSON, that new line delimited JSON, and how it's streamed across. So what's nice is with async streaming and ASP.NET Core, using the new system.text.json stuff, you can do that as well. So he goes through and shows how that works and shows a few gotchas with that, that you also need to use the deserialized async enumerable method in order to get that streaming deserialization. He also ran into an issue in the latest preview 6, and so, but that's being fixed. It's just a kind of point in time thing in the current preview. But so this is really cool good stuff. Then just a few announcements of upcoming things. We've got .NET Conf Focus on F#, something you know about, Isaac. You're going to be speaking there as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely. More on SafeStack.
Very cool. So that's coming up. This is a whole. We do these one-day mini conference things for .NET Conf Focus events. So that is an F# deep dive. And then for those that are completely new to F#, we've got a cool event coming up on Friday, and that is a Let's Learn event. So we've been doing these every month. At the end of the month, we're doing these Let's Learn events, and this is going to be just a basic getting started stuff. Luis is going to be walking through things with Jamie Singleton. So these are a lot of fun. We've done several of these in the past. And there's a link in here somewhere, which I'm not seeing, but there's a bunch of previous Let's Learn events that do the same thing for like Blazor and Web API. The one other link I included is just this link to the SafeStack. I figured you'd go through it, but I might as well include it there so people can find it. And I'm done talking. So I got asked the question from the beginning: why would I build ASP.NET Core apps in F#? What's kind of the advantage there?
I guess there's a few ways you could approach that. I guess one is the bigger question is why would I use F# than any other language really? And a lot of people tend to talk about that as like, is it a better language or a worse language? I really steer away from that these days. It's more about what is a better fit for you, what suits the style of way you write code. And I've got a couple of slides that will sort of give some hints as to whether you'll find it a nice fit. ASP.NET in general, I actually think is a really natural fit for F#, because if you think about web programs, what are they really? I've got an HTTP request, and then I give you back an HTTP response back out again. It's almost like a function. I've got some input and I've got some output. So you can almost think of it as kind of a function over the web in a sense.
That makes some sense. A lot of request response paradigm. It's not interactive. I mean, it's something comes in, doesn't get changed, and something goes out. I can't help but seeing, as I was looking at some of the SafeStack sample code, and then also just thinking about the minimal APIs that they're working on with ASP.NET Core, it's kind of like, oh, this is a pattern that, you know what I mean? It's something that is already available in SafeStack.
Yeah, exactly. So it's I think you're starting to see a lot more convergence in the ASP.NET designs and C# in general. And you're getting records in C#, we've got pattern matching, all those sorts of things now. And those are things that have been sort of core features in F# for a long, long time, almost since the start. So it's like you're starting to see these two languages and the framework really try and take advantage of that style of programming. Okay. Yeah.
Sounds good. All right. Well, did you want me to share your screen or?
Yeah, let's do that. I've got a couple of demos and some slides, unfortunately, but I'll try and keep them to a minimum. I thought I'd start with, especially given what you just mentioned about SafeStack, just a really quick demo, just to sort of prove to everyone you can write end-to-end apps in F#, which have got a GUI in them, and this is actually using like Bulma, the style sheet that you were just touching on with the Blazorite stuff. So this is like a web app where it's hosted in the app service. Currently I'm running locally, but it's also, we can host it in Azure App Service. It's using like Azure Storage, Azure Search, all those sorts of things are running on ASP.NET. It's just an app I did where I've got like a data set of like property sales, house sales in the UK. And I can do things like, let's look for a property in London, and I can get a data grid, and I can sort of do grouping and stuff. And these are using like open source, commercially available React grids and stuff. So this is all like React with JavaScript behind the scenes. I can do things like hit a little button here where I get a map control and modal dialogues, the sorts of things that you would expect to see in a standard sort of web app. I can do sort of ask Azure Search to do a search on show me properties that are located next to one another, all the same sort of stuff that you might want to see. I even get things like validation here. So like postcode, for those of you that are not in the UK, that's like zip code in the US. And as I type here, I'm getting like, this is an invalid postcode. So I'm actually getting, as I type, this is not like doing postbacks. This is F# running in the browser. So it's like, what's going on there? How do you do that? So this is really what to be honest, I'll be talking more about on Thursday. But I almost just wanted to say, like, let's start by just dispelling that myth. You can write end-to-end F# apps, and they are still able to interop with like JavaScript libraries and CSS style sheets. This kind of thing of, F# for the data scientist, it's still true, but like where I am, we basically are writing straight ahead web apps, JavaScript components, all in F# sort of thing. So yeah, that was kind of the first thing I wanted to get out of the way, almost just to.
Yeah. It's not a toy. It's not a little proof of concept. This is a full featured web application with everything I'd expect to see.
Yeah. So next thing, I'll just show you the safe web page, as you said. So this is kind of the home of this safe stack, which is this technology, or I should say a grouping of technologies that bring together like F# on the server on ASP.NET Core, and then on the client on top of JavaScript and React. But you still have like F# across the whole thing, so you can write apps without really knowing JavaScript. Helps if you do. The same way it helps if you know ASP.NET behind the scenes and so on, but you don't have to know all these sorts of languages and technologies. We've got a whole host of docs on there, getting started, sort of diagrams and recipes. So we've got a whole bunch of sort of how do I do things and stuff. So it's really a good place to get started. There's like a .NET template, so you can do .NET New Safe and get up and running. I don't want to spend too much time on that today, but just if you're interested, have a look at that and then find out more on Thursday.
And that's the teaser. If you're watching and interested today, show up Thursday for the deeper dive on safe.
Exactly.
I will say, like, I'm excited to see that. I went through the quick start, and it was, in a few minutes, and I was up and running, and worked great with like I used VS Code with Ionide, and it was really a smooth experience. Great,
good. Always happy to hear that. You'd be surprised, like even just on that, like a few years ago, when the .NET Core tooling wasn't as slick as it is today, we had to do a lot more work. Now we've got things like .NET Tools, which really makes it so much easier to get a lot of these things sort of working and up and running. And the whole sort of .NET integration with Ionide and code is really, really great now. So yeah, absolutely. Right, a few obligatory slides, but I'll try and smash through these in just a few minutes. Can you see that okay? I never know whether PowerPoint full screen works. Okay, good.
Looks great, yeah.
Good. So first thing I just wanted to get out of the way, I'm not going to focus on the kind of the whole sort of why F#, what's the value proposition behind the language. If I did that, I'd spend an hour on that, and we wouldn't focus anything on ASP.NET Core. So again, if you're interested in the sort of the bigger picture about F#, Scott Velashan, I think, is just before me on Thursday. If you go to any one talk on Thursday, that will be like the best introduction to the why F# generally and functional programming. I put this slide in without realizing you were going to also show .NET Conf, but if you do want to go, then yeah, Thursday, July 29th, focus.netconf.net. So you sort of touched on this before, John, where you said, like, why would I like F# though, or what would it be about it that would sort of encourage me to try and use it? So I sort of like to come up with a few sort of check marks. Like if you say yes to all of these sorts of things, this is usually a good sign to me, having worked with people from the C# background, including myself for 10, 15 years. If you sort of tick most of the boxes here, you're probably going to be someone that might actually find F# a better fit for how you write code. So if you like link, you like records, you don't use inheritance anymore, you tend to prefer interfaces, you don't have a problem with static classes, you like the new lightweight nature of C#, where you don't have to do namespace, open curly brace and indent, and you've got these sort of lightweight new things. These are probably things that you might think, F# actually might not be such a shift for you. So I always just include a slide like that just to sort of help with that sort of questioning.
That's I'm sorry, but that's really probably the clearest explanation I've ever seen. Like, we didn't talk about monads at all, or like any, it's like it's just, this is as a developer, like, I like all these things as developer style. This is a great sales pitch here.
Great. So those are usually the people that we work with in the past that have found it easy to transition into F# and really enjoyed that switch. So you never know. Next time we talk, maybe John, you'll be doing F#. But okay, so I thought it would be good just to almost address the other question that you asked at the start, which was like, how long have you been doing ASP.NET with F# and so on, and just give a kind of my journey at least as to when I've been doing sort of F# in the web. So I would say it sort of started out when we started doing F# projects. We would tend to say, well, F# is more for the business logic. We'll maybe make a project and reference it from a C# web app. So maybe it was like business logic or validation or data access. But we didn't see F# as being, I can do a whole app just in F#. It was, we still needed C# and Razor and all of those things to really make a proper coherent web app. And then I think it sort of changed a little bit. And we had this library called Suave, which came out some years ago. And this was kind of a, how shall I put it? It didn't use ASP.NET. It's its own web server, but it was a really nice programming model for F#. And it really was a different way of thinking for F# developers. Rather than having to say, well, I want to write a web app using ASP.NET, therefore I have to inherit from controller and so on and so forth. It was a very different way of writing web apps, which really caught on in the F# space. And then we sort of had this library called Giraffe, which is what I'll be looking at today, which is this kind of Suave on ASP.NET. So you get this nice F# pattern and this nice F# sort of experience, but you still get all the nice things about ASP.NET. So we get ASP.NET Core, we get the high performance, all the extra bits, all of the nice things, but yet we still get this nice language sort of F# first experience where we don't feel we have to maybe play to a framework that isn't designed to really show F# strengths, if that makes sense. And then you sort of had some other libraries like Saturn, which I'm not really going to talk too much about today. I maybe show a demo. It's kind of extensions on top of Giraffe that gives a slightly more line of business sort of approach and a kind of a more streamlined framework, but it's not necessary. And we'll just touch on it briefly. Then we had this thing called Fable, which was what I basically was demoing before, which is basically you write F#, compiles into JavaScript. And that's really that technology I was using before, where I was showing you this web app where, F#, but it's actually running in the browser. And then SafeStack was kind of, we brought all of these things together into one coherent package where you can say, I want a .NET new safe, and it says, all right, I'll give you a back end, which is Giraffe, and a front end, which is Fable, and I'll hook them all together with Webpack and so on. So
this is really helpful, because as I looked at Safe, then I was like, okay, what is this, and what do I need to know about Giraffe and all that? So this simplifies that for me.
Great, good. That's good to know. I'm only really going to focus in the demos. I mean, I'll show you a couple of bits elsewhere, but we'll focus more on Giraffe because that's the bit that's more about ASP.NET Core.
Okay,
and that's where we'll focus on Fable. It's JavaScript in the browser, so I thought we'd focus more on that. Just to rule out another of the sort of common questions, in case anyone asks, in terms of performance. So this is taken from the
Tech Empower.
Tech Empower, thank you, John.
Yep.
So just to show, so red is basically C# ASP.NET Core MVC, green are F# library, so Giraffe there, ahead of MVC in some parts, not ahead of obviously just core middleware and ASP.NET Core, but just to show it's, it's certainly not way off. It's right in the middle of there. So if that's a concern from anyone, can I write F# web apps? Totally fine.
Wow. Okay.
Yep. This is just a slide I put on, which basically was our point before. So I think, HTTP as a function is a real thing. It's just we get a request, and you can think of these as kind of arguments, query string, header, tokens, post, and so on. And then maybe you've got a response, which might be a success or a failure. Maybe I've got some data in the body or not, and some headers and so on and so forth. And that's actually a natural fit for a function. Yeah, take some inputs with some arguments. I will return something back out again. What we sometimes see, though, particularly in ASP.NET Core, is if you're using MVC, there are all these abstractions on top of it. You've got controllers with filters. I basically just looked on the ASP.NET Core MVC docs, and I just took a bunch of these sorts of abstractions and terms. And you really have to learn quite a lot of these to do sort of, MVC style apps today. You've got to know, how do I do controllers? Where do the attributes come in? How does the routing work? We've now got endpoint handlers, and it's a lot of different things to really learn. At the same time, you've kind of got this thing now in ASP.NET 6 where suddenly now, David's done a lot of great work with this, where we're saying this is a whole web app now. You basically say, right, I want to create a new web app, map get for this route to this function, and that's it. And it's suddenly like all of these things now that we had here, we're actually saying, well, maybe you don't need them for certain types of apps. Maybe you can just say this endpoint goes to this function, and you'll give it back some data, and happy days. So it's certainly a different way of working in the C# world that I remember.
I have to say, I mean, I've written books on MVC. I've struggled through, and helping people debug issues with action filters and, kind of more in depth, like mapping and routing and stuff as they moved from different version to different version. And it's nice looking at this kind of like a web app you can fit in a tweet. That's not a bad thing. Absolutely. Especially when it's not junk code. Like I see, this is something where I can still work with, like this could be testable, and this I can work with, like I can build it on, I can expand this in a sane way. So exactly. So it's not a kind of a sandbox. It's just, if you don't need that complexity, you don't need to start with that. You can build it up over time, which I like. So just the point that Alexandra mentioned, so he's just mentioned Bolero. So for those of you that don't know, so that's a good point. Bolero is basically a technology that sits on top of Blazor WebAssembly, and it basically lets you write F# on top of WebAssembly in the Blazor sort of coding model as well. So yeah, good point, Alexandra, but we're not really going to talk about that either today, but yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. So there's just to sum that, there's two options then for the client-side code. There's Bolero with F# running natively in WebAssembly, and then you showed earlier also Fable, and that's the transpiled to JavaScript. Exactly. And I guess it really comes down to the decisions that we often have is, do you want to play on the JavaScript ecosystem natively, where you're using all the standard JavaScript tools, or would you prefer the kind of WebAssembly model where you've got different trade-offs? There's pros and cons to both those approaches. I'll be entirely upfront there. We're firmly in the safe stack world, JavaScript first, but I know some people that are using Bolero, and it works super well. I did have normally, the joke is you spend the first week of any web app these days, like setting up Webpack and making sure NPM's working right and all that. And I was really happy with the safe stack, like quick start, and I had an NPM build, and I had Webpack configured, and I had testing, and I had like all the routing. It just worked, So that's always nice to have a. Yeah, I'm not going to deny Webpack is it's almost its own little. You could run training courses on that stuff, and I'm no expert in it. It's not easy. Yeah. So yeah, absolutely. So there was a question you were showing on performance, and I think, to be fair on this, like it's incredibly fast, but the question was like it seems slower than ASP.NET Core. I think that's a little bit unfair though, because that ASP.NET Core, some of those are highly tuned, that are kind of optimized for the benchmark, right? They're not like real world. They're not showing a razor page, and they're not like doing a lot of work. Yeah, I think the best one to compare Giraffe with is rather with MVC than ASP.NET Core. So that is literally Kestrel
with no MVC on top of it. It's just the absolute raw engine with nothing added on, no middleware, no nothing.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas MVC is where you've got all of that extra stuff on top of, and that's where Giraffe kind of sits alongside of.
So they're essentially the same, yeah.
Yeah, so they're essentially the same. So
wow.
Great question. But yeah, that's really more about the whole sort of middleware layer. By the time you get to that top bit where you've got the API model, then it's actually the same as MVC.
Okay. There was another question. I'm not sure if we're at a good spot for it yet, but Curious Drive asked earlier, I'm scrolling back to find it. He was asking what sort of applications are a good fit for like building an F#.
Yep. The quickest answer is anything that you would want to write an app in C# or .NET, you could also do in F#. I try to avoid this kind of shoehorning of, F# is great for mathematical applications.
Right.
It simply isn't the case. I mean, I'll give you an example. We're doing now a PWA for a company in the energy industry for like capturing meter readings. So their agent can go around into plants and capture, on the device. We're doing ETL applications, data capture, upload in a web browser, put it into SQL in Azure, do some calcs, put it into Power BI. Basically anything, line of business apps, it just works in F# as well. I know that's probably not what a lot of people expect.
Yeah.
But it's a general purpose programming language. The difference with C# is how you go about thinking about modeling your problems, how you want to model your code, how you problem solve. It just sits on .NET the same way. So I'll show you in a minute. You can do system.console and you can get the exact same things. It's just how you interact with the framework.
Okay.
Yep. Cool. Great questions, though. So I wanted to focus then a bit about middleware, just briefly, and then we'll jump into some code. And we've still got 45 minutes, so that's good. So this is taken from the ASP.NET website, and it's talking about this thing of this concept of middleware, which is this way that you can sort of stack composable bits of sort of behavior or code into your ASP.NET pipeline. And it's got this kind of model where we say we take in a request and it will go to the first bit of middleware, which does some logic. That could be auth check or going through some headers or something. And then we call this function called next, which will call the next piece of middleware. And that will then call the next one. And then eventually it will sort of unwrap and go all the way back out, and you'll end up with this response. And that is, what does it look like? So it's basically it's a function, and it says basically, I've got some context, that's like the HTTP context, and this handler to the next item in the pipeline. And I'm going to do some code here. And in this case, it's looking at the query string and saying, what's the culture? I'm going to set the current culture info to whatever is in the query string. And then I'm going to call the next pipeline piece and so on, yeah? The only things really to think about here is what the inputs are, HTTP context, and the next one in the pipeline. And it all happens asynchronously. Yeah, async way. That is basically how most F# developers look at entire web apps, to be honest. That's really what Giraffe is. So it basically is the same thing. We say we have an input, which has got our context and the next item in the pipeline. And then you decide what you want to do. Either one, you can return back a new version of that context. So maybe I've modified the context, added in some headers, or put some auth checks in or something. Or it didn't work, I'll return back nothing. And then it's a 404. Sort of, the pipeline didn't work, something went wrong. And this whole thing happens in an async or task. So it's in effect the same thing as here. Async context next. So async, we have a context and we have the next handler. And that's really it. Yep. Basically, that is all that when we think about Giraffe apps and F# web apps, we say we don't need most of these other abstractions. You can actually just focus on this one and actually write entire web apps with that. And that's really what I want to really focus on today, is that simplicity of having a simple single abstraction lets you do all the other things by building on top of them.
Okay.
Okay, good. So this is an example of what we call an HTTP handler, which is Giraffe's name for like middleware. So it could be something like I want to set the response body to a text value, or the content length, or the type, or the response code. Or I might want to say something like, is the user authenticated? Have I got enough, have I got a token in the request? And if I haven't, I'll just go down this route of maybe a 404 or 400 sort of thing. What about the root? Is the root /greet? If it's the wrong root, then my pipeline is sort of dead. It's the wrong thing. Or maybe the verb. Is it a get? Is it a post? Is it a put? All of these things you can get from the HTTP context. Everything. You don't need, a controller. So anything that uses that context, you can basically use with Giraffe.
So the idea then, are you layering multiple HTTP handlers or?
Yeah, that's exactly. You got it. So you can basically plug all these handlers together to make bigger ones. So we can say, right, we've got one handler. Is the root greet? Is it a get? If it is, then I want to plug another one in, set the content to 202, and then I can plus them all together and get one handler that actually does all these three things underneath. So if you think like to design patterns in Gang of 4, this is almost like decorator pattern, where you keep the same sort of structure and interface, but you just have different handlers on top of one another, which is really the same as this kind of pattern here.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right, good. I'm only going to show the slide one just briefly before I jump into code, just to make sure people don't get the wrong idea. All the examples I'm going to show, they're all like everything is going to be like the HTTP handler and the business logic is just in one function. I'm not going to sort of separate out and do a proper architected app. That's not how you do a large app. In a real world, you'd probably have like a pure F# domain, and you'd probably say, right, I'm going to read in my request, I'll parse the request, give it to my pure F# code that can do its business logic, maybe it goes to SQL, does some mapping, and then it's going to come back out again and then put those results into a response. You would never write an app where, you mixed everything into one big function, of course.
Yeah.
But in the interest of simplicity for now, I'm not going to do 20 files with a massive application. Otherwise, it would just be too complicated. So I want to just keep things simple for today. But that's definitely how you would do things.
That makes sense. Before you leave the slides, I had one question. Going back a few, you had one where you were looking at like all the different things in an MVC application. There's all those kind of concepts. Mm-hmm. And so one part of my mind is saying like, well, those are a lot of concepts, but I need to do a lot of those things. Like, for instance, I need some way, like maybe not a controller, but I need some way to do like, to write out my UI or like authentication. I need some way to do authentication. Does that mean I'm writing all this by hand or, like what's the trade-off in?
So the nice thing is with Giraffe, it comes with a load of these kind of, I guess it's not the fact that you don't need these things. You definitely do. It's the fact that each one of these is a kind of different mental abstraction. Mm. Yeah. Each one of them, like a controller, is completely different to middleware.
Yeah.
And attributes is another way of trying to expose behaviors on top of middleware. Or authentication might be exposed in a different way in the SDK. What Giraffe says is actually let's stick with one abstraction which is flexible enough to do everything, and we'll build on top of that. So I'll show you in a minute. You can do like UI, you can do some kind of controller style logic, but it's all based on that one abstraction of context and next, and just pipe it through a pipeline. And if you know that one abstraction, you can basically do anything on top of that.
Got it. Okay.
Yep. Cool. Good. So I think actually we're now at the point where we get to do code and we get to see if I'm actually making all this stuff up or if there is some reality to this. So yeah, I'm just going to do kind of three things really, which is one, just look at a plain ASP.NET Core app in F#. So just a basic app, maybe an MVC app, and just look at what that looks like, the standard experience. And then we'll spend most of the time looking at Giraffe and how that looks from an F# point of view and where the sort of interaction with ASP.NET is. So here we go. So I've got VS Code open here. I've already prepared a few in advance just for when I inevitably need a hand to remind me of what to code. But I'm going to start with the .NET New. So I'm going to start with just a basic web app. So if I do .NET New list, which is going to show me all the different templates on my machine, hopefully. So we'll see we've got a load of ASP.NET Core ones here. And you'll see that some of them actually do have F# out of the box. So this is nothing like third party. This is Microsoft. You guys have written these templates. So I can create an empty ASP.NET Core app, or I can do MVC in F# today. In addition, I've got my safe stack one here, but we're not really going to look at that, but you can add your own ones, of course, as well. So I'm just going to show you this basic web app, what it looks like, and then I'll show you an MVC one as well. So it's a .NET New Web. I'm not going to do --lang F# because I'm full in on F#. There's an environment variable you can set that defaults to F#. So I don't have to type .lang. But for those of you that aren't doing that, you have to remember to do that. Otherwise, you'll get C#. So .NET New, it's done a .NET Restore. So this is standard .NET tooling, and it's created me an FS proj instead of a CS proj. It looks pretty similar to what you'd see in a CS proj. The only difference is in F#, you do have to actually specify the files. I won't get into the details of why, but there is a good reason for that.
Okay.
But I can be the standard sort of, .NET build and so on, and that all works. Just in terms of what the app looks like, so you can see probably some things that look similar, like I'm opening namespaces at the top. So you have the same concept there. Instead of the word using, it's open. Fine. In my program app, you'll see again things that look similar. So I've got this host create default builder, which will be familiar to ASP.NET Core developers, and I'm saying use startup of this startup class and things like that. So this is already, for those of you that are using ASP.NET Core, John, tell me if I'm wrong here, that those sort of concepts are, I guess, familiar, although the syntax may look a bit weird.
Yeah, no, that looks exactly the same, basically. Yep.
Right, good. And a class in F# is a bit different in terms of the syntax. So instead of class, we have the word type, and the constructor is simply after the type name. So that's the default constructor. There's some nice things about that. For example, if I was to take in a constructor of, let's say, name, just a non-default one, you don't have to actually bind that to a private variable to use it in methods. I can just straight away just start doing things like name dot, and it will automatically behind the scenes make a backing field. So in some ways, you can still do classes in F#. There's no reason why you can't. This is a method called configure services. Here's another one called configure, which takes in the IAP builder. So all the things that you'll see, interfaces, getting IntelliSense on it, that's all there.
Yeah. If I wasn't paying attention, I wouldn't have noticed that this wasn't your standard. Like, it looks so similar in terms of, it's the same APIs in general, right? But
exactly. So it doesn't look that different. And I can do things like let's do HTTP localhost. And then if I'm just going to run this, I'm going to use the REST client. Where have I gone to? Is it 500? 5,000? Oh, maybe I should have put that in as well. Let's try that again. There we go. So indeed, hello world, we've done it. It's using Kestrel. So this is just standard ASP.NET. So that's step one, removing this kind of fear that F# means giving up all of that. If you know these technologies and these sort of features, it's just a matter of how you compose them together. Next, I want to jump to an MVC app, which is obviously a little bit more complicated, and interesting how they've done this here. So same sort of things to start with. I've got my startup app, and I can go to startup, and you'll see things like add controllers with views and add razor pages. And I'm adding in all these different middlewares and things. This is the same as you would see in C# today. I've even got razor views in here, so I go to home and you can see CS/HTML, so that's fine. The controllers are a bit interesting in that they're actually the F# classes. You'll notice here this is another class. Dependency injection here, so the iLogger is going to get injected in the constructor, same as you would normally see. Inherit from controller. Anyone who's on the call who's like an F# developer will be sort of recoiling now, like inheritance.
Oh yeah, inheriting, right?
But you can see the same sort of thing. We don't need curly braces for methods. Okay, fine, we just indent. But it's the same sort of thing. Attributes, it's the same sort of thing, really. There's nothing interesting about this, really, from my point of view. This is not any way different of writing apps in terms of composing. It's just a different syntax. If you're going to write apps like this and you really want to use the MVC style approach, my advice personally is stick with C#. ASP.NET is designed to work in a kind of primarily C#. Everything around here you're going to see is going to be out of the box. That's what it was geared up in mind for. F# can totally do it, but you'll see little things here like what's this this arrow ignore thing here, right? What is that? And you see, if I delete these, I'll start getting all these warnings coming up now. And it's like, what's going on here? And this is like where the standard out of the box experience starts to break down a little bit. So in F#, because it's a functional first language, it's built on the premise of like everything's immutable.
Mm-hmm.
You give some data and you get back some data. Yeah. So if you like, look at this method here, app use HTTPS redirection, takes in nothing, and it's giving back another IAP builder, right? So the compiler is saying, hang on a minute, why are you, if I remove that, you'll see this warning again. You're getting back an IAP builder, but you're not doing anything with it. You're not binding it to a variable. You're just throwing it away. Why are you calling this method? Yeah.
Yeah.
Obviously in C# that's totally fine because this is normal behavior. You write this and it's mutating that app builder and it's a fluent API.
Right. Okay.
Yeah? Whereas in F#, the whole sort of mechanism and the way that you think about code is very different. This wouldn't make sense to do in F#. You wouldn't have a method that you call that returns something that you throw away. That would be the only reason for having a method or a function.
Right. Because like you're saying, in C#, I'm thinking I'm mutating, I'm doing something with the object passed in or that I'm calling from.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, but in F# you wouldn't do that. You'd probably get back the value and then you'd pipe it into another function and another function and another function. So that's sort of where things start to get a bit more boilerplatey. And if you've come if you start writing an ASP.NET app in F#, you'll get frustrated with this and you'll think, everyone told me F# is succinct and quick to do, and I'm having to write ignore everywhere and jump through hoops. And that's where things like Giraffe have come in of let's write a model that plays to F# strengths rather than F# having to sort of, do extra code to work. So that's really where Giraffe is.
While you're in there, sorry, but we did have a question that's kind of related, and this was about returning HTML versus JSON from an endpoint. And I think the reason I'm mentioning now, this is returning just as you would in C#. You can return a razor view from here, right? So.
Yeah, you can. I will also show you. In fact, I'll show you at the end. If I forget to show you, I've got a demo where we're actually doing server-side HTML in F# without razor. And it's all strongly typed. It's really beautiful. So make sure I don't forget that, and that will come at the end. And for Matthias, that's like, don't leave until the very end because then you'll see it.
We had one other question just to throw out, and you can get to it whenever it makes sense. But for questions like data integration, does any framework core play with F# or do you use something else, or how does that work?
EF is a difficult one because it is really geared up towards an OO kind of model. You've got your types and you basically got your data context, you get your data back, you mutate the data, and then you hit save changes. Yeah. That's almost like completely against the whole idea of F# with this immutable data model. And I think in EF now they're looking at how do we do this with C# records because C# records are immutable. So this actually might play nicely for F# because EF now has to almost come up with a way of supporting C# immutable records. Maybe that will help F#. I don't recommend people use EF with F#, or if they do, use C# to create your entity framework contexts and then call that from F#, because then otherwise you have to create classes in F#. You can't use records. It's just a pain. It's another example of a library that was designed for C# that really pushes at the edges of F#. But you can totally use it if you really want to. Personally, we tend to use things like Dapper or RepoDB, or there are a couple of F# specific libraries that are quite good as well.
Angel's calling out a few here.
Dusty tables and stuff. Yeah, so there are lots of other options. SQL Provider is really good as well. So yeah, that one will sort of be a bit of a surprise for C# devs. Really, really nice. EF is, I've got to say, it's not a great story for F# at the moment. Not because it doesn't work, it's just not designed in such a way.
One other question, I'm trying to balance the questions with letting you show what you want to, but how do you integrate with test frameworks? Are you using separate test frameworks, or does it work well with things like XUnit and NUnit?
Yeah, absolutely. So we use XUnit, we use NUnit as well. So you can just do the same as C#. You can create classes, or what we call modules, which are like static classes. You can create methods, you decorate them with the the fact attribute, it just works. There's also a really nice F# sort of more functional first library called Expecto, which is really different. It's basically, it just says each of your tests are just functions, and you compose them all together into a program, and it just runs through them with a runner. It also works with VS, so you can use like the VS test runner. But yeah, you've definitely got that as well. And that's kind of a common thing we're starting to see here. You can sort of integrate with the standard .NET libraries, but people then sometimes write kind of wrappers or alternatives that just push F# a little bit further on.
This is making sense to me now. Like I always kind of wondered, like, when do you integrate things? How well do things just, and then why are there some that have kind of a wrapper? And totally, it's the adapting the programming model.
Exactly. Exactly.
Okay.
Cool. Right. So let's go back to the app I created, the basic web app. Right. And now I'm going to try and add Giraffe into this guy. So I'm just going to do .NET add package Giraffe. So normal .NET add, normal NuGet. You know, people think you have to use packet for F#. You don't. You can just use normal NuGet. It's just a normal NuGet package. I'll do .NET build. And I'm then going to rip out the whole routing engine from this basic app. And I'm going to open up Giraffe. Namespace. And Giraffe needs two things. You go to services, and then you say, just uncomment that guy. Right. And then I can say add Giraffe. So that's like adding in the extensions for Giraffe. I'll say ignore there as well. And then down here, I basically have to turn over control for routing and everything to Giraffe as well. So I've got this use Giraffe here. This is where Giraffe sort of takes over and we leave the standard ASP.NET world, right? And you'll see it takes in one argument here called an HTTP handler, which is our middleware thing that we saw before.
Right. Okay.
Right. So I'll leave it in here for now. I'll just create a little module, which I'll call web, and I'll call handlers. And we'll just do a couple, and then I'll switch to an app I've already done. So I'm going to create a basic app, which we'll call Hello World. And Hello World. And I'll just give it a type annotation. Say it's an HTTP handler. And that's basically it. That's, handlers. So that's basically a web app. What's going on behind the scenes here, I'll show you in a minute. But I'm just going to sort of turn this on and I'll do watch run. Let's see what's going on here. So I'm just going to go to that same endpoint again, and hopefully we'll see. Oh, well, okay, great. Still using Kestrel. It's just now, instead of using the standard sort of endpoint routing like MVC, we've turned over control to Giraffe. This is exactly one of those things that I mentioned before, one of these kind of handlers that are doing this, taking in the context, doing stuff with it, and returning stuff out. This text one, I'll actually go to the source code. Hopefully this will work. Yeah. And you can actually see what it is. So we've got source link here, so it's jumping straight to the source code. And you'll see it's actually pretty low level. It's doing something like getting the bytes of a string that we're passing in, setting the content type to text plain, and then writing the bytes out to the stream. So if ever you've done any low level sort of middleware, that's all it's doing. Nothing special. Wow. Yeah. There's a couple of bits with this syntax that I'll show you afterwards, but that's really all there is to it. There's loads of them though, so I could say, let's do another one, but this time I'll do it as XML. So that's another built-in one in Giraffe that will do the same sort of thing, but instead of doing it as plain text, it'll then do it as XML because, hip and trendy. That's what everyone is doing these days. Okay. Now you've got XML stuff. There are other ones I could do. So I could do something like set status code 202. And will just return whatever I've got, but it will set the status code to 202. Now, this is where I sort of mentioned to you before about we can compose these guys together. So imagine I said I wanted to return the text hello world with a status code of 202. Mm-hmm. So what I can do with this is this strange looking operator, which is just arrow equals arrow. So in F Sharp, most people don't do this, but you can define your own operators. Right? So you can create your own custom operators that are just functions behind the scenes. Just plain functions.
Yeah, you can create I'm sure it's probably different. You can create operators or override operators in C Sharp, but it's usually a bad idea.
Yeah, exactly. So for DSLs like this, it's a good idea, but don't go crazy in a standard application with a million of them. But in this case, it's really nice.
As you said, as a DSL, it's perfect.
Exactly. So I can say now, look, I've got set status code of 202 and then pipe that into text. So I'm sort of plugging them in. You'll notice that I didn't have to change the type of this thing. It's the same. So it's like I said to you before, like this decorator pattern, where I'm going to take this one and then plug it into this and give back a new one, which has exactly the same signature, the same way that middleware does. You never see on the outside how many layers of middleware you've got. It has exactly the same syntax.
Okay.
So this is like in middleware where you do like app.use and you add in another middleware layer. This is the same thing, but just for a particular endpoint in this case.
So in this one, you're writing one HTTP handler that does a few different things. It layers a few of those together. You could also write separate handlers and then pipe those together as well.
Yeah. So I could say set as 202 equals set status code 202. And then I could just replace this with set as 202.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's just, that could be a function, that could do whatever you want.
Yeah.
That's kind of a different thing in F Sharp, is this notion of like just throwing functions around, just treating them as data. It's like pretty standard to just say, I've got this bit of code and I want to pass it to another function. It's functions as data kind of thing. It's pretty standard.
Which I always shy away from with C Sharp, whereas you can kind of do it, but you're like funk of a funk of a funk, and it's like.
But in F Sharp, you often don't even need like type annotations. The compiler will often just infer a lot of that for you. So it makes you don't have to do funk of T of X of Y. It does all of that stuff behind the scenes. So it's it kind of removes that fear because of the way the language works, or you don't have that cost to pay in terms of that. So yeah, there we go. So 202, hello world, beautiful.
Cool. We've had a few questions come in. I'm trying to balance them, but there's some question. This is specific for your VS Code indent coloring, but just in general, your VS Code setup. What sort of VS Code setup stuff do you have to do?
Yep. So the only real thing you'll need is to install Ionide, which is the F Sharp extension. So that's Ionide F Sharp. That gives you basically the syntax highlighting, IntelliSense, all of that good stuff. I've of course got a load of other extensions. I've actually got a blog post, so I'll send you and we can put into the notes later. But that one for indent highlighting is I think it's either Indent Rainbow or there's another one somewhere that I've got installed. Let's see, installed. Indent Rainbow, I think that must be it. I can't think of it.
Somebody said in the chat they thought that was
great. It. Okay, good. I've also got there's a couple of others like the error handling. So when I did something like this, we get the errors inline as well, which is quite a nice extension for VS Code. That works with C Sharp as well. It's like anytime an error is shown, it just shows it inline, which is super.
Oh, that's nice.
All right, so now I'm going to sort of step up a level, and I'm going to build that kind of text one from scratch. And you'll see that's like what's going on behind the scenes. So this is probably as low level as we'll go, and then we'll sort of jump around the other way. So let's go back out again.
It's just funny. People are saying that this question comes up every time. So.
Yeah. Okay, Giraffe FS. Good. So here's one I prepared earlier with a load of different stuff in it, but it's basically the same app. So nothing really different. Let's leave this here and I'll do it line by line. So this is basically doing exactly what I just did, but from scratch. So in F Sharp, to create a function, we just say let and then function name, and then argument with a space in between. So this is type signature, the type of it, and that's the argument. So this is more like TypeScript, where the name comes before the type, rather than in C Sharp where it's the other way
Okay.
Yep.
So if you added more arguments, it would be that same. Okay.
Yeah.
Nice. Okay.
So this is actually, if we think back to what I said before about middleware, you get the next handler, the context, and its async. That's exactly what we have here. Next handler, the HTTP context, which is ASP.NET, Microsoft ASP.NET Core HTTP context, and then it's all inside this task block, which is basically async. That's how F# does async. And in there, I want to say, right, UTF-8 get bytes of the word hello world. Set the content type. So I'll just dot into this context so we can see I'm not making this up. It's the standard ASP.NET context. There's nothing different there. Set the header, set the status code to 202, and then write the text out into the body.
Okay.
This strange sort of syntax here is basically F#'s version of await. So this is returning a task, and we want to await the result, so we put this do bang at the front.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah, let's accept that. And then this is kind of this only unusual bit is calling the next handler, so the next chain in the middleware, passing on the context that we've just sort of updated a bit. And then that's going to do whatever it needs to do. We don't know what it does, of course. So thinking back to the middleware, this is saying give control to the next piece in the chain. And the syntax here is a bit weird. Think of that in C# as something like that. Call next context. Yeah. Yeah. In F# you don't need to put brackets around single argument functions.
People were asking questions about that in the comments. When do I do parentheses and that?
The same way that if you create a new object in C#, in F#, like let x equals obj or object, you don't have to put the new keyword in. That's optional. So I can do that if I want, but the compiler will actually, you don't need to do that. You can just get rid of it. So that's really what a core sort of handler is. Now, if I wanted to say, let's actually, let's add this into the app so you can see what I'm doing here. So I'm going to go to Startup, and I've already got it in there. Perfect. So that's the same as what we saw before with the Startup app. Here I'm passing in that say hello function I've just built as my whole web app. So it doesn't matter what route I'm going to go to. Doesn't matter what verb it is. It's always going to return this text.
Okay.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Now, if I wanted to parameterize this to say, actually, rather than hello world, I want to put in some arbitrary text, hello from Giraffe, whatever. Mm-hmm. This is where kind of the power of F# comes in, and it may sort of fry your brain. So I don't want to spend ages talking about this. I want to wow you with more other stuff. But I'm going to copy that, and I'm just going to say text. And I'm going to make that a parameter here. Not like that. Text string. Now I've said this is the first argument of this function. Is yeah, great. I'm going to go back to my startup app, and I'm just going to pass in here hello from Giraffe. Okay, now that compiles. Now, if you remember, anyone that was watching, there's 3 function arguments here. And I've only passed in one of them. So this is kind of one of the nice things about F#. It's got this feature called like built-in currying or partial application, where you basically, if you're not using the last arguments, you can ignore them, and the compiler will basically hand it on to the next function. So it just matches what this guy needs. This one wants a function that takes in these 2.
Okay.
And we've passed in the first one, which leaves us with just those 2. So you can we filled in this one, and we're left with 2 holes, and that's exactly what this one wants. A function with those 2 holes, the next and the context.
Okay.
So, yeah, does that make sort of sense a bit?
Yeah.
Let's leave it at that. I don't want to waste too much time on that.
No, I mean, I've played with currying a bit, like with JavaScript as well, and it's like it's okay. So.
In JavaScript or if you can do it in C#, but it's just like func of T, and it's just crazy. In F# it's just out of the box, you get it. So we've sort of got this composed one. Anyway, I wanted to just run through a few other sort of examples of some simple handlers. So I showed you like text and JSON already. You've got a built-in JSON one, which we use the whatever serializer you've got built into ASP.NET that you've plugged in, it will use that. So this is creating a record in F#.
Okay.
So this is field equals value.
Okay.
Yeah. In F#, we've got this nice thing called anonymous records. It's kind of like anonymous types in C#. So we don't even have to declare like a type with the shape. I'm just creating one on the fly here.
Oh, all right.
So I'm just going to plug that into my app here. And then I'm going to run this. It would help if I actually put in the namespace as well. HTTP handlers. JSON. Let's do .NET Watch run. So this is the same sort of thing, though. It sort of takes in behind the scenes this context, and the next thing it's probably doing things like setting the content type to app.json, the content length, calling the serializer, and so on. But nothing more than that. But these are all built in, and you can compose them however you want. Here's a slightly more complex app. Use that in the loosest sense of the word. So I'll just run that one quickly, just so we can prove that that's actually doing our JSON. There you go. So JSON, message hello world.
Okay.
Yeah. So this one is going to look through the file system for the current directory. So standard .NET again, system IO, enumeration options, enumerate all files in the current folder. And then for each file, I want to put that into an array here and put the number of files, .length, and an arbitrary string. So again, another one of these kind of apps or little handlers, but now I'm actually doing some actual, business logic. I'm calling out to the file system. This could just as easily be doing a query against the SQL database or something. It doesn't really matter.
Mm-hmm.
But I just want to sort of illustrate the fact that you can actually write proper, doing something, returning a collection of data and putting into a shape that matches nicely.
Those anonymous records are really nice for that. Like I don't have to go through and declare a big thing. I can just do it in line right there.
Exactly. This is one I showed earlier on. Just again, a very quick sample. The middleware handler that I showed in the slide deck in C#, is exactly the same thing here in F#. So this one is saying, look at the query string, get out the field called culture. If I've got one item in that result, then build a culture info. This is like mutate in F#, like single equals in C#. So set the culture and the current culture and so on.
So wait, I'm confused by that. That operator is setting, it's mutating. Okay.
In F#, single equals is in C# double equals.
Okay.
Equals means equals in F#.
Okay.
That's a better way of thinking about it.
Yeah, no. The typo I've made 100 times.
Rather than an assignment. So this is assignment.
Okay.
So I've already shown like composing already, but I'll show it again. So this one is setting the culture info, and I've got another one here that's printing out the culture info. So these are two separate functions. They've got nothing to do with each other, but they're just relying on, this one should be run before that one.
Okay.
And I can do that here. Culture handler. So this one should work first.
Oh. Pipes
into report culture. Yeah.
Now, if I've got 50, or if I've got more than two, do you just chain them all on one line? Do you?
Yeah. So the nice thing is you could create a set of like reusable handlers. So let's say at the start of every message we want to do, we always want to do auth, and we always want to set the culture, blah blah blah. Well, you could make reusable.
Oh, right.
Handler, and because they're all just the same signature, they all naturally compose, and then you can just chuck them around and give them to other classes and so on, or other classes.
Okay. So then I can pull in that reusable handler and a bunch of different other handlers.
Exactly.
Okay.
Just show you routing. So very basic routing here. I know we're running out of time, so this is showing a bit more. So here, if the root is this, and the verb is get, then give back the text hello world.
Okay.
Yeah, I could get rid of that, and then it would be for any verb.
Wait, I'm sorry, I missed that. What was that get? Is that get a hand? What is that?
That's another handler.
A handler.
And the job of that handler is check the verb in the request. If the verb is get, hand over to the next one. If it's not, give back nothing. Stop right there.
Okay.
Yeah. So you can do almost conditional.
Yeah. So if it's not get, it'll fall through to the next handler.
Exactly. Okay. It will just stop right there. We can also do parameterized handlers. So this one, I've got this little F at the end of root. So unlike that one, and I can put in a hole here to say this must be a Boolean. So if it's not, give back nothing. Stop right there. Okay.
Okay.
We can also do parameterized handlers. So this one, I've got this little F at the end of root. So unlike that one, and I can put in a hole here to say this must be a Boolean. So I want to say, is F# cool? And there it's got to be true or false. And then go into this function. And that's the Boolean. So I can have this kind of strong type plugging them together. If it's cool, then F# is damn cool. Otherwise, try again. And if I change this to say like I for a number, I'll get a compiler error. I expected a Boolean. You gave me an integer. Bool isn't compatible with int.
Okay.
So you can make this kind of, in ASP.NET MVC, you would kind of have a method where you pass in the arguments. It's the same thing, except in F#, it's kind of, it does it a slightly nicer way because you can have this type holds. This is how you might do something a bit bigger, so a bigger app. So here, I've got a load of different routes, all doing different things. And I can use this choose handler, which basically says, go through each of them. The first one that matches, use it.
Okay.
If it doesn't match, go to the next one, go to the next one, go to the next one. And that is itself just another handler.
Okay.
So you can compose all these. So imagine you've got an app where you've got like two parts of your app, like a secure site and a non-secure site.
Yeah.
You could have two different versions, like secure routes, which has got an auth bit at the front, insecure routes, which has got another, which doesn't have that secure, and then you plug them together using choose, either secure or non-secure, and you can just continually build them up, one on top of another until you've got your whole app. So your whole app ultimately will just be one of these, with just lots of small little things, and they all boil down to the same little thing like text. They have exactly the same signature, which is really powerful. Yeah,
this is really blowing my mind. You've shown how you can build an entire web application, but I am seeing immediately how building APIs with this would be incredibly productive, because I can just focus on what I'm returning. I can use those anonymous records. I can, I could
Absolutely.
Get quite a bit.
Yeah. I know we're running out of time, so I'm just going to jump through a couple more demos. So I promised Matthias I would show this. So this is showing.
We had one quick question here. We're not crazy tight on time. We can go another 10 minutes or so. We had one here on what would code look like for get and post in the same URL.
So you could do things there like this. You could say, I think this will write. Dustin's on the call. He's the designer of Giraffe. So
he actually said this.
But I think you could probably do something like this. Get. Or, in fact, what you'd probably do, Dustin will probably correct me if I'm wrong here, you'd probably then push this into a get one.
And then another route. And
then another with post. Or you'd have it as a choose. So you'd say choose, get, or post. And then you point it onto hello.
Okay.
So there's a few ways of doing that, but you're not the first person to ask that. There you go. Dustin's actually said it. There you go. Choose, get, and post. So yeah, it's the same thing. So as long as one of those pass, it will go on to the next one in the chain.
Okay.
So I'll set this one up as. In fact, I'll just leave the whole app here. So let's just put the full app in startup. And we'll have a couple of minutes to show Saturn and Fable Remoting very, very briefly. So that file system one that I showed you, so this is the same thing using actual HTML, so a page view. So I'm doing the same thing at the start, reading all the files, and I'm creating file infos. And then here I'm going to use this extra add-in for Giraffe called View Engine, which gives us a strongly typed API for HTML. So each of these little head, link, title, body, those are actually functions in F#. So unlike Razor, where it's HTML with C# embedded, F# flips it around. And it says, actually, we need the whole thing in F#. So this is a real function. If I mistype it, I'll get a compiler error. There's no need for custom tooling. It's just F#. And I can do set this class here. For each file in file infos, create a TR with a TD in it. And then inside that, then set the string name and the length of the file. And because of the nature of F#, it's really succinct syntax. Each of these are just lists. So think of like an HTML has some attributes and then a list of elements underneath it. And head has some attributes and some elements underneath it. And body has some attributes with elements underneath it. So it's just a tree structure.
Okay.
And it's just that there's no custom tooling. It's just code. It's just pure F# code here. There's nothing more than that. And
so this is the Giraffe view engine that's doing that?
So this is more for server side. I want to generate HTML on the back end. And just to prove that, hopefully, if I remember what route it was.
I understand. You've explained it well. I understand what you're saying, but this is totally blowing my mind to see that.
Yeah, it's like, how could I do that? Yeah, absolutely. But it is, maybe if I actually put in a proper...
And that's similar to the Safe Stack demo. I believe that's using Bulma or something, but that's...
Yep, that's the style sheet, exactly right. But the difference is that stuff, the HTML is being rendered on the client. Whereas this is server-side generation.
Okay.
So let me just steal this. And so, all right, it's not the most incredible UI, but it's just HTML.
Wow.
So you can definitely do that as well. There's nothing to stop you doing that.
Okay.
Cool. I've already sort of showed about the composing stuff. I showed the view engine. I'll leave that out. So very quickly, I'll show a couple more things, and then maybe we've got a couple of minutes for questions. So it would be remiss of me not to mention Saturn, which, as I sort of said before, it's like Giraffe++. So it's just a set of extensions, and it does something like this. It introduces these things called blocks. So if you remember with Giraffe, we still were using like the normal ASP.NET way to create an app, startup classes and so on. Saturn basically says, well, actually, we'll hide all of that for you. I want to create an application, and it's going to use this app as my router. And that's a normal Giraffe app, HTTP handler. But I don't have to do the use startup classes or anything. That's all I need to do. And then I say run app, the app runs. That's it.
Yeah. Because that startup's kind of boilerplate anyways, right?
Yeah, exactly. But you've still got escape hatches. So I can do things like configure, app config, host config, service config, so all of those things are still there. But it just means you don't have to put all that boilerplate in there. I can do things like use gzip, and I'm using gzip compression. So it's just a set of things to get up and running really quickly. This is a nice sort of DSL for doing like standard routes. So get hello, give back text hello world. So that's the same as we had before. We had that sort of verb get and then route. So if you don't like that style, you can do it like this, where you create this sort of router block, and you can do things like this instead.
Got it. Okay.
But it's just another sort of API on top. It's still using Giraffe behind the scenes. So the same principles of HTTP handlers is there. It's just slightly different syntax.
Okay.
Yep. And last one I'll show is this thing called Fable Remoting. So this, I don't remember, John, did you ever do any Silverlight?
Yeah, I actually did
do RIA services.
What's that?
RIA services or
WCF RIA services, Silverlight, yeah, all that.
Yeah. So this is basically a library called Fable Remoting, where you basically create an API, so an interface, iGreeting, with two methods on it, greet and goodbye, implementations, and then that's it. No routes to do. Route is calculated based on the name of your method. Serialization handled for you. That's it. You basically say, that's my API, that's my app. Off you go. And then, so it's you don't even have to worry about, route and get and stuff. It's just, here's my methods, here's my functions, execute them. And it will create the routing table behind the scenes for you.
Okay.
So we find a lot of use for this with people coming to F# from maybe not .NET backgrounds, where you want a very simple way of saying, here's my contract. Yeah, I want to have a method called greet that I'm exposing and another one called goodbye. That's the input, that's the output. Fill in the body. And I don't have to worry about HTTP or serialization. It's completely sort of abstracting that from us. Okay. Yeah, but it's exactly the same thing. Behind the scenes, you'll see there's still the startup class. It's still using the sort of the ASP.NET engine. It's just another way of doing your routes. Okay. Okay. Yeah, it's using reflection behind the scenes basically to see, oh, we've got a method called greet. Therefore, I'm going to add an entry into the routing engine called /greet.
Got it. Okay. Which is the style that's used in the safe? Yeah.
So we used to start with Saturn and Giraffe, but we've actually moved to Fable Remoting. So this style, because you typically, when you're writing a safe app, you own the client, you own the server. There's a lot of benefits from this, which is basically client server is all in F#, you can just write F# without having to worry about, like, you can write a type. Like, I could write a record here called customer with a name and an age and a department. And because of the way that Safe works, it will compile this into JavaScript on the client, but keep it as .NET on the server, and I can just write F#. And I won't have to think about when I'm in JavaScript land or F# or .NET land. It's the same type. So you don't have to worry about, oh, I've got a type on the server in JavaScript. I've got to make sure it matches.
Right. It's just all F#.
It's all
and then
done.
that's something that's kind of, we're out of time to dig into. But my understanding from looking at that is the Fable compiling, you get all those kind of type safety things.
That's what you want to come on Thursday for.
Okay. And that's a great place to end with, is to point people to that this is a great introduction. We really wanted to focus. We didn't want to overlap too much with what you're doing on Thursday, but this was a look at kind of the server side and the kind of middleware and the back end stuff. And then on Thursday, you're going to be talking more about like building apps and safe stack and
all that good stuff, client side logic, all of how it ties together, all of that. Yeah, exactly.
Awesome. Okay. Well, I think that's a great place to wrap up. And then send over that link for the extensions. People want to see that, and any others. I'll include those in the show notes too.
Brilliant. Thanks a lot, John, for your time and inviting me. I've had a great time today, so thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you to the people watching for all the great questions. I learned a ton. I'm really excited about this. So thank you, and we'll see you on Thursday. Okay.
See ya.